In the 21st century, those who change the world are those who change the culture. They get people in sync, lead tribes, create movements, and generate an energy field where ordinary people achieve extraordinary results.
Basically, we need to create a culture where we can pause for a moment and just check in with ourselves, and so that we can think, engage, and act in a way that helps us move forward. And so one of the small tools is that we acknowledge, that's the first A, we acknowledge how we feel right now by just checking in, thinking, how am I right now? What's going on? Then we accept the state of the union, so to speak. We accept the situation that's at hand. Instead of, oftentimes we're like, oh my God, I wish it wasn't this. Again, we're focusing on the wrong thing. But instead we accept the situation for what it is. And then we can ask, what do I need so that I can? And that's the act piece.
I'm Aga Bayer, and this is the Culture Lab podcast, where you will find ideas and inspiration on how to harness the power of team and organizational culture. I talk to leadership thinkers, culture experts, entrepreneurs, and all sorts of movers and shakers, and together we explore the fascinating topic of culture, leadership, and personal growth. If you like what you hear, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Or better yet, write a review on iTunes and share the podcast with your followers and friends on social media. For more, check out our archive at www.agabayer.com/podcast. Hi, and welcome to episode number 40. My guest today is Jeanette Bronée. Jeanette is an author, speaker, performance strategist, and also a culture coach. And she helps leaders and companies rethink performance, but also culture, by focusing on what she calls a culture of care. And I think that you'll find that this episode is slightly different because we don't really dive into the topic of team or company culture until the second part of the interview. Instead, we focus on what each of us can do to practice self-care. So even if you are not as obsessed with culture as I am, you'll find that it's a very relevant and very useful discussion. We cover things like nutrition and self-talk and how they impact our ability to be productive, happy, but also our ability to have a positive impact on others. And then in the second part of the interview, we talk about what culture of care really is and how we can cultivate it in our teams. And just to share my key takeaway from this interview, I'm definitely taking away a question. And this question has two versions. One, to ask myself, particularly when I feel overwhelmed or stressed. And the question is, what do I need now? And then the second version of this question is a question that I can ask my team or even my clients, especially when I find them being stuck and struggling. And the question goes like that. What do you need so that? And you can fill in the blanks with, what do you need so that you can get this done on time? Or what do you need so that we can exceed our clients' expectations? And so on and so forth. So Jeanette has also inspired me to take a better care of myself. And I think that this conversation made me realize once more that the life that we live is the lesson we teach. And so people around us are not going to take a better care of themselves and of their well-being if we are not walking the talk. I hope that you enjoy listening to this interview as much as I enjoyed talking to Jeanette. Have a listen. Jeanette, welcome to Culture Lab.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation today.
I'm so glad that you are here. And I think that it's going to be one of really useful conversations for everyone, irrespective of whether they are interested in organizational culture or not, because you have a lot to say about the way we should be taking care of ourselves as human beings, not just in the context of organizations, right?
Yes, I do. I do. Because I've seen people for so many years. I've been working with people trying to take better care of themselves. And I've kept seeing the biggest struggle for people has been going back to work and being like having all the intentions of taking better care of themselves. And then work hits, stress hits, and we don't have the tools to take care of ourselves at work. And so we're trying to get that life to match up, and we keep failing, so to speak. And failing, I don't mean that it's our fault. I just mean it keeps not working.
It's hard, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to dive into that conversation. But before we do that, there's one question that I ask all our guests at the beginning of the interview. And that question is about the early cultural influences that shaped you as a person. So tell us, what made Jeanette Jeanette?
I'm born in Denmark, so I do come from a culture where we are a lot more socially engaged with each other rather than fending for ourselves. And I think this idea that we are looking at our culture as taking care of each other, even if we don't know each other, is basically the foundation of the culture, right? And I think that's a real core element for me, that we as human beings are in this together, whether we know each other or not. And this idea is probably the backbone of everything I do and believe in, is that we're all looking for the same things. And it's just different ways of getting what it is that we need in our lives to be happy and healthy and thrive. We have different ways of getting to that, but the core elements of what we want and need as human beings are really, truly the same. And it's this idea that we can create cultures, even at work, that help us support that is really important. And when I grew up and worked in Denmark and was leading teams in Denmark, already early were we working with culture. And I just even eating lunch together as a company, where it was normal. It was what we were doing was we would leave for lunch and we would go to the canteen and everybody would sit down and have lunch. And it was a place of bonding and having conversations and creating a culture that was not just about working together, but actually being human beings together.
That's wonderful. And yeah, it's so true. We are social animals, aren't we? And I think it's absolutely impossible for us to have quality life without these connections.
Yeah.
So tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do. And then I'll have a follow-up question on that, which is what brought you to what you are doing today.
Sure. I help leaders and companies rethink performance so that we can prevent burnout and stress and really be our best selves at work. I believe we don't have to lose our health to pursue a career. And so I coach, I speak, I consult with leaders, with people that need me, so to speak, in terms of private coaching. But I also go into companies and do workshops or speaking engagements, both from a place of motivating people to actually want to take charge of their health and well-being at work, but also giving them the tools to see how they can. Because I think a lot of times we actually want to, but we don't have the tools, or we don't feel we have permission to. And so those are some of the things that I really look to change.
Yeah. We're all waiting sometimes for that permission slip, aren't we?
Yeah.
From the headmaster.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was your journey? Because I imagine you probably didn't grow up thinking, oh, I want to help leaders and organizations to create cultures of care. So what was your journey? How did you get to this point?
The first part of my journey, I was in the fashion business for the first 15 years of my career. And early on, I always liked the newness of it. And it was basically, I was in retail and I was leading people from a really young age. And I had these women in my department that could have been both my mother or even older than my mother, as some of them could have been my grandmother almost. And I saw them, I looked at them, and they looked at me like, what is this young girl doing here? But I looked at them and I saw that they had something that they had lost. They had lost the inspiration, and they had lost whatever it was that was driving them every day. And I kept asking them a lot of questions because I wanted to learn, partly because I was a new leader, very young. I was in my early 20s. But also I wanted to understand them. It's always been really deep in my core to understand people. Growing up with a mother who's bipolar, that's kind of like your job on the side. It's your sidekick to figure out what other people think and feel. And so I was curious and I asked a lot of questions. And I realized that they just needed to be seen and heard. So early on, I worked with coaching them on the job and developing this sense of why does it matter what I do? And they flourished. I saw these women flourish that had been just tired and worn out and just going to work for a paycheck. And all of a sudden they were engaged.
So
and
what was missing basically was meaning.
It was meaning, but also that I saw them for having the experience and the wisdom that I didn't have.
Yeah.
And so I asked them, because they had seen their customers every single day for years. So they knew their customer better than I did.
Yeah.
And I gave them permission to use that knowledge in their jobs. And so for me, this early on, seeing how it's so important for us to understand why we do what we do. It sounds so basic, and yet there are so many times that we actually don't have that. We don't take that with us to work. We might look for it at home, and sometimes even at home we don't feel that we do what it is we want to do. And sometimes it's because we don't really know how to do it or how to get there. And I think we need to ask ourselves more questions about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny because I work with organizations, helping them cultivate a culture that's going to enable them to bring their vision to life. And very often we use assessment tool to look at their culture, take a snapshot. And one of the elements that comes up again and again that creates dysfunctional culture is that lack of meaning and that lack of sense that I'm actually contributing to something that is bigger than myself. And the funny thing is that sometimes these people work in organizations that have an important social mission and still they cannot very often make this connection. So I think you're raising a really important point here, because it takes a manager just like you back then to sometimes enable people to create that connection again, to spark that motivation at work again, and enable them to feel fulfilled.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so important to just think that people feel that they matter, that they belong. I understand how hard it is sometimes to do that on a greater scale, but it also can just take a moment and really just ask, what do you think? How would you solve this? And so continuing my career in the fashion business, all of a sudden both my parents got cancer, and I ended up with both parents in cancer therapy at the same time. And they also ended up dying just about a year apart. And so we're now fast forwarding to 15 years in the industry, and I realized I needed to make a change. I needed to make a change for me because I was told it was only a matter of time before I would get cancer too. But I also wanted to really make a difference in how we work. So 15 years ago, it's kind of funny, it's 15 and 15. It feels like I'm at the next 15 point, yeah. People might wonder how old I am, but yes. But it was interesting to see like how the idea that we could take care of ourselves at work, like in the fashion industry, it was just like, why do you need to have lunch? I don't have lunch, my boss said to me. You don't need to have lunch. And I was like, you don't want me around if I don't have lunch. Like, I don't work well hangry. And it was this idea that it was just not even a thought, and I wanted to change that. So already 15 years ago, I actually wanted to go in and change the way we work so that we could take better care of ourselves. But it's taking this long before companies are really ready to look at health and wellness, not as a benefit, but as the foundation for how we create these cultures that actually function well together and where people actually care about coming to work because they are feeling cared for as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard you say that stress and burnout is the edge that most people live on today,
Yes.
and that 50% of workforce leave their jobs because of stress. So I'm curious, what do you think is the number one problem with the workplace today, if you were just to zoom in on just one thing?
I think actually it is that we don't understand why we do what we do, so we work in fear. I don't actually
agree with that.
Yeah, I don't actually believe that we get stressed from being busy. I think we get stressed from believing we can't get done what we need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so, so true. And again, from my experience with organizations, exactly that. So dysfunctional cultures usually breed well in fear. And that's the main reason that a culture really gets derailed when there's a lot of fear. Am I going to be able to do what I need to do, or trying to pretend that I'm stronger than I really am because it's not safe to be vulnerable. So again, fear of being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. Yeah. So the number one problem you see is actually fear.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It really is. And I also think there was a study that came out that 7 out of 10 millennials burn out before they're 30.
Oh my God.
And the reason, it was mostly women. And it wasn't because they had chores that they needed to take care of. Actually, they used the chores to let go of steam. The reason why they were burning out was because they didn't feel they had direction and purpose. So it really comes back to what burns us out is that we don't feel that how we work so hard actually matters or has impact. We're just spinning our wheels. And so it's more the emotional and the mental relationship with work that's burning us out.
So where do you think we should start fixing this problem? Does this start with each individual within an organization, or does it start with the organization who should be able to create that environment for people to find their meaning and their purpose?
It's a little bit of both, because I do think that the organization needs to actually create an environment where people can take care of their core human needs at work. We need the physical safety first before anything. We can't access our emotional and mental intelligence or resilience if we don't even take care of our physical survival needs.
And when you talk about physical safety, what kind of factors do you have in mind, Jeanette?
Just even having lunch.
Right. Okay.
You know, because when we're dehydrated, if we're hungry, we have an automatic response that's physical response to stress or to survival that, you know, our bodies haven't been upgraded. We may be working with AI and high level technology here, but our bodies are still on the same system. And it means that we need to have food, we need to get our sleep, and we need to get our water. If we can't even start there and just integrate that into a workplace routine where people have 15 minutes between meetings to just reset their nervous system, go and pee and have water and take a lunch break where they actually don't work during lunch. Those are small things that every business can say, this is our new policy, and it will actually give them time back.
Yeah.
So I think that's the very first step, that we do have to create these environments where people are actually physically taken care of. Then we can create the next level, which is the sense of belonging and actually feeling like we matter. And that's by asking better questions.
What sort of questions?
For example, asking, so I noticed that this is not getting done. We're very close to the deadline. Instead of saying, why aren't you doing it? We can say, what do you need so that this gets done? We can ask the person to get involved in the solution instead of blaming somebody for not having done it. Because the minute we blame somebody, they go into defense, they're back in survival mode, they're back in fear. And if we instead can say, okay, so what do you need from me so that I can help you do this? Or how can you find a solution to this? And so a lot of times I teach people how to ask that of themselves from a physical perspective, right? Like, what do I need right now so I can be more focused? Well, I might need to just go and take 5 minutes. Or I might need a glass of water because I realized I'm dehydrated. So that may be a very just simple, oh, wait a minute, I actually need something here just so I can pay attention.
But this is, I just want to underscore that because it's such a simple thing to do, but it completely shifts the conversation that we have with ourselves. Because I think where the cultures of fear start is actually within us. And very often we have sort of a blame culture within ourselves, and we blame ourselves instead of asking ourselves, what do I need at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a small shift. And when I talk about asking the right why, we tend to ask ourselves, why am I not getting this done? Why am I not doing this? Why? And part of my background is I studied hypnotherapy, not so much because I wanted to hypnotize people, but because I wanted to understand our unconscious mind.
Yeah.
And what happens when we ask, why am I not getting this done? The unconscious mind will automatically try to answer that question for you over and over again. That's also why we don't sleep at night, because we ask ourselves the so-called wrong why when we go to sleep. And we get so in our unconscious mind, even at sleep, we're trying to solve a problem we don't want to solve. So when we ask the right why, we're asking, I recognize that I am not getting this done.
So to help our listeners to sort of create their own toolbox in terms of what would be the right questions to ask themselves. So definitely sort of get rid of it, cross out the question why. Do you have any other tips in terms of how can we start asking better questions of ourselves?
I do. I call it my AAA.
Okay, so what is a AAA? Let's go there.
If you're in America, you have AAA to help you get your car out of trouble. So we can get ourselves out of trouble. So I call it my AAA. That we need to create a culture where we can pause for a moment and just check in with ourselves, and so that we can think, engage, and act in a way that helps us move forward. And so one of the small tools is that we acknowledge. That's the first A. We acknowledge how we feel right now by just checking in, thinking, how am I right now? What's going on? Then we accept the state of the union, so to speak. We accept the situation that's at hand. Instead of, oftentimes we're like, oh my God, I wish it wasn't this. Again, we're focusing on the wrong thing. But instead we accept the situation for what it is. And then we can ask, what do I need so that I can? And that's the act piece.
Okay.
What is the action that we can take? So within the AAA is my think, engage, act model that says, if I pause for a moment and ask myself, how am I right now? What do I need so that I can? Which could be, I need to talk to so-and-so because I don't have enough information. Or it could be, I just need a break right now. Or, I need to talk to so-and-so because I feel there's something between us that's unresolved. It could be whatever it is. It could be, I need a meal with more energy in it instead of just snacking on something that is actually just wiring up my energy to get me more anxious. So all of these things, it applies to everything. And then the act is, what do I do so that I can move forward rather than react? Which is what we do when we're on survival mode. When we're on fear mode, we react.
Yeah.
And it's this idea that we can come out of reaction mode and actually pause, notice what's going on, and then apply the AAA. Acknowledge what's going on, accept the situation for what it is, and what's the action I can take to move forward.
I love it. And I love how simple it is and how actionable it is. So one thing that I want to ask about this is, how do you then make sure that you snap out of whatever has sort of hijacked you at the moment? Because I think the reason that people don't take the pause is that they are not even conscious of what is happening to them. Sometimes we're just on this crazy hamster wheel, running somewhere and feeling stressed, and we are not even aware that we're on the hamster wheel at the moment. We got stuck. We've been doing the same thing for the past 10 hours and not making progress. So how do you snap out of it to be able then to acknowledge?
Yes, it's such a challenge for so many people to actually shift this. So there's different ways we can do it. One is to actually make it a habit to check in on a regular basis. So we function best if we work in 45 to 90 minute increments. That's when we're performing at our best. So we could create a plan where we're like, okay, every 45 to 90 minutes, depending on how I'm very good at staying focused for 90 minutes. But some people are not, right? And so I'm very good at really honing in. And then I need that 5-minute break where I just check in and be like, okay, where am I at? So that at least within that 90 minutes, I know I can snap back out of it if I feel like I'm on the wrong track. That's one way. The other way is to learn how to be a little bit more in touch with our bodies. I think that one of the real problems that we have is that we have come to become a culture that disregard how we feel and the felt sense that we have in our body rather than using it as our, like I would almost say, superpower. Because
totally, just pressing on and the hustle culture, right?
Yeah.
You have to really work hard. And unfortunately, we have these icons like Gary Vee or Elon Musk or Marissa Mayer, who talk about sleeping on the floor and really pushing hard and, doing whatever 80-hour weeks and stuff like that. So that doesn't help.
Right. And it's unfortunate that that's what sort of gets taken from those things as the way that they are so innovative and creative, because I actually think that that's part of the problem, is that we lose out on our creativity and our innovation. I'm not saying they do, but people do when they're under survival mode and stress. Now, the thing is that maybe they're not actually under survival mode because they're having a good time being on that mode, but that doesn't mean it works for everyone, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have fun. You can work all day long if you're having fun.
Yes.
But you still need your pause and your break here and there. You still need your water and you still need your food. But this idea that that we have to keep doing without actually checking in with our bodies, which is really where our true intelligence is. If you think back, the heritage that we have as human beings is that we're in touch, that we notice things around us. That's how we survived for years and years and years, is that we're actually very aware and mindful and present.
This is it. Yeah, this is so true. And of course, we haven't really evolved since then, but I think we lost that, definitely. Yes. I have a little story to share actually about this, because a couple of years ago, we went to the Serengeti, and there was a guide that at Lake Myanmar. His name was Meli, and he was a beautiful Maasai young guy. And I remember our first walk with him. We were just walking around the lake. And for me, because we were in the Jeep for so many days, I really just wanted to walk. And sort of when I think of walking, I think of exercising.
Right.
So I started walking with this really fast speed. And he said, slow down, look around. This is how we walk.
Yeah.
And he said, we just look around on the ground and take one step after another, really slowly. And I have to say, for the first 10 minutes, it was so incredibly irritating. I just couldn't. And then when you get into that rhythm, you realize how much you are missing when you are running like crazy. And I remember he said there are going to be some huge eggs that you will see. So I just want you to look around and see if you can notice them. And when I slowed down, I noticed them. But if I was walking like I was walking before, there was no chance. And I realized, oh my goodness, we really lost the way we used to be in nature. We cannot do it anymore. Yeah. It's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that right now when we're at the office, you asked me before also about like what are some ways that we can start noticing this. And if we could start noticing our bodies, you will feel stress come into your body because it feels like your whole body is tight and your head is spinning. But that's how most people feel at work every day.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so a simple little thing is just to feel your feet on the ground and breathe into your feet. You come back into your body, you actually can start just taking that moment to just, it takes a second to just notice your feet, even when you're walking, right? So this idea that you're walking from one meeting to the other, we're in our head thinking about the meeting, but what if we were in our feet? Just noticing our feet for that moment, we would feel a little bit more reconnected by the time we walk into the meeting. So there's some really small, simple tools that can help us get back in our bodies. And I do believe that if we could be a little bit more, I kind of don't like the word hold because that indicates that we're not whole because we always are, but it's more about paying attention to the fact that we are one whole system that functions together. And I find it sad that we have lost this connection with our bodies as the most important tool that we have every single day for getting to work.
Yeah. So walking and being mindful as we're walking, as you said, maybe from one meeting to another is one way of getting ourselves grounded and getting ourselves into our bodies and connected again. What are other things that people can do to get connected to their bodies and recharge during their workday?
I think standing still for a moment when we talk to other people and actually be present to them and ourselves at the same time. So that a lot of times we stop and pause and speak to someone, we're almost like turned the other way because we're on our way somewhere else. That means our mind is on its way somewhere else too. But if we could actually stand in front of each other and just land for a moment, because if we can be a little bit more in our bodies when we are having a conversation with other people, there's a good chance we can have better conversations too.
Yeah, definitely.
You know? And so it's all of those little things that just is about noticing. And it can take just a moment. We don't have to learn how to sit and meditate. I think meditation is great because it teaches us how to be mindful and notice our thoughts and what our thoughts do to us. But that's too big a leap for some people, and they need to take it with them on the go. It's just about noticing your body and just putting your mind in your belly, so to speak.
Yeah. So speaking of bellies, you are a nutritionist as well.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there is a short way that, brief way that we could talk about what are some main principles of good nutrition for us that people could implement in their lives easily?
I think the first thing is to stop living on stimulants. We live,
Coffee, tea?
Coffee, sugar, things that are stimulating us. For that matter, alcohol too. It kind of calms us down, but it's also a stimulant for a moment. So it's this idea that we're living on things that are trying to fix us rather than things that are trying to support us. So if we're looking at how we can support ourselves, it's more about eating a proper meal, not just a snack. Eating a proper meal that has some kind of good complex carb, which comes from the plant kingdom or the plant, vegetables or whole grain, things like that. But some kind of carbohydrates so that we can get the brain energy that we need and the muscle energy and the physical sort of energy that we need, but also the serotonin that we need so that we can feel more calm and centered and able to think. So carbohydrates help us with the serotonin production.
So is that why, because I've read recently that if we only eat carbs, complex carbs once a day, a good time to do it would be in the evening because it helps you sleep. Is that true?
That could be true, yes. Sometimes people need it in the morning because they wake up nervous.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, where we're asking ourselves, how am I right now? What do I need so that I can? It's a very simple question. And I ask myself that all the time. I ask myself first thing in the morning, what do I need today so that I can be at my best? What do I need right now so that I can, get ready for this conversation with you, for example? Right?
This is definitely a huge takeaway for me, Jeanette, from our conversation. I'm going to ask this question myself all the time now. What do I need now? It's so beautiful in its simplicity.
Right. And we can do it on a regular basis. And what's really funny is I think we actually do ask that and in other times where we might be solving a problem. We might be doing it at work. Like I have so many times where I've been with a client that realizes that the tools they apply to their work day can be applied to their self-care.
Totally.
Like the way they think actually works to solve the problems in their self-care. And when I talk about self-care, I don't talk about manicures, bubble baths, massages, and yoga. That's all great. That's all great.
Yeah.
What I talk about is the self-commitment, self-awareness, self-responsibility, and self-expression.
Okay, so you'll have to explain what those things are. But before we go there, let's just finish our conversation about nutrition.
Yes.
So you say carbs for serotonin.
Yes.
What else?
And then the protein we need for dopamine. So dopamine is our get up, get going. That's when you have a meeting that you need to present. You want to make sure you have more dopamine in you, more protein, than you do carbs, because the carbs from starches and vegetables might make you not feel so energized or engaged. Whereas if you're sitting down and you're writing something that you have to put a report together, you may want more serotonin so that you feel that you can focus and feel more centered and think through problems without feeling triggered by sort of getting up, getting going, that this sort of distraction that we sometimes have, that we have to be on the move. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's important that we, number one, notice how we feel in that moment. Because if we're really stressed, having more coffee is not a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And what about fats? What is your take on fats?
We totally need healthy fats. I do believe that we need more plant-based fats so that our bodies can process it more simply and more easy.
It's like avocado,
nuts and seeds, fish for that matter too. There's a lot of omega-3 fatty acids in eggs as well, as long as, and I do think that it's important where our resources come from, trying to get free range and pasture-raised eggs and things like that. I personally get my eggs from my neighbor, for example. Not everybody can do that, but
definitely not.
Right? But if you go to the store, there's a good chance you can get that. Now, you can't maybe not get that at work, and that's okay. It's not like it's not all or nothing. It's about what do you do most of, right? So I think often we have this mentality that, if we can't do it perfect, we might as well not. It's not true, right? It's not true. I have a really kind of little bit of a crude and rude way to describe that. Will that be okay with you?
Absolutely. It's a podcast. You can say anything.
It's kind of this idea that people are like, well, if I did one little thing that's not really healthy for me, I might as well go all the way. I was like, well, that's not really true. Like, if you step in dog shit, you're not going to sit down and roll around in it.
Yeah,
right?
I love that example. Yeah.
Right? It's just like, so why would you do it in your self-care?
Yeah, totally. But we do set up ourselves for failure this way. It's so true. And I catch myself doing this as well. Like, I say, okay, I'm going to eat really clean this month and really, really healthy. And then something happens. We go out with friends or whatever, and I fall off the wagon. And then I'm like, okay, since, I've already sort of fallen off the wagon, then I can just continue eating crap now.
Right. Yeah.
Until the next month, maybe when I can get my shit together again. But it's.
And I do the opposite. I do the opposite. I say, okay, I had wine and dessert with dinner. I better get a really good breakfast. So I try to think of it, how fast can I balance back?
Yeah.
How fast can I jump back? How fast can I balance? There's an old story about a student that asked the Zen master, when will I ever learn to balance the way you do? And he said, I don't balance better than you. I just find my balance faster again.
Yeah, I get that. Oh, that's a beautiful way of putting it.
Yeah.
So one more question about nutrition, and then I'm really curious to dive into the topic of self-care. What is your take on intermittent fasting? It's been gaining popularity recently.
Again, I think it's a very individual decision. For me, I think that our digestive system in general functions best that we don't snack in between. We want to, from a health perspective, we want to get as low insulin levels as possible, which means that we need to fast between meals. And I see that as at least 4 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and our digestive system works the best way too. It's a little bit like if you keep getting piles of files on your desk before you finish the one you were working on, you're never going to finish. So that's the same with our digestive system. If we keep putting food in there, it's kind of like, oh, wait, there's something new I got to take care of. Okay, let me get going. So is this, if we can take a meal, finish that meal, it takes the stomach 3 to 4 hours to empty, and then we're ready for the next.
Yeah.
Right.
And some people will even do intermittent fasting for longer, like 18 hours. So they'll just have dinner at 6 o'clock and then eat again 12 o'clock.
Yes.
Skipping breakfast, basically.
Right.
And they swear by it.
Right.
And actually, my husband does a lot of intermittent fasting as well. And I can see that it's done him a lot of good. So as you say, I think it can work for some people really well. And you have to know your body to know whether you can do it or not. I can't say that I can do as much intermittent fasting as he can.
Right.
So he thrives on it and I don't. Yeah. So it's very personal.
Well, you can look at how you're doing it too, because I believe that we do need at least 12 hours between dinner and breakfast. But for me, for example, breakfast is more important for me than dinner. So I would be fine having breakfast and lunch and then not have anything until the next morning again. And maybe just, if I needed anything, maybe just have a light broth or something at night, because I'm not that hungry at night. Right. And so I get better sleep that way. So we can look at when we function best. So I know that I need the energy in the morning. I don't need it first thing like 6, 7, 8 o'clock, but around 8, 9 o'clock, I need breakfast. I know that about myself because I can notice my energy. And if I start getting distracted, there's a good chance it's because I need something in my body. and I look for what that is. And most of the time that would be, oh, okay, I need breakfast.
Yeah. So again, it's back to that question, what do I need?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about self-care. You mentioned those 4 pillars.
Yes.
So can you talk to us a little bit about each of them?
Yes. Self-commitment is about creating a routine that helps us be more present and look for what it is that we need. So that's back to our habits. What are the daily habits that we can put in place that creates a routine, that's a rhythm, that supports what we need? Now, it's not fixed, because some days we may need something, different than we do on other days. It depends a little bit on what it is that's on our program. But it's this idea that we actually create a routine that supports what it is we normally do. So my routine, for example, is different on weekends than it is during the week. But it's this idea that I'm actually consciously choosing my habits. It's a commitment to my self-care, because I see that as a foundation for how I function every day. Mm-hmm. The self-awareness is what we've been talking about, right? Tuning in for a moment, ask, hey, what's going on in there? How am I right now? How do I feel? I feel a little bit like this. That's the self-awareness. The self-awareness can also be like, why am I saying what I'm saying right now? What is my agenda? What is my intention? So self-awareness is not just your body and how that feels, but also really having that self-awareness that says, why am I doing this? I'm curious about that why of what is it that I'm looking to achieve from doing this? That's part of the self-awareness, right? And it's also how we create meaning.
Or where is it coming from? I find for myself that very often I catch myself engaging with people in a certain way or doing things, and then I'm asking myself, okay, where is this coming from?
Right.
And very often I realize, oh, this is ego, or this is insecurity, or, some sort of stuff that I simply consciously, I don't want it to be driving me and my behavior.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of times I think that we come from the ego, especially when we react based on fear. Right?
Totally.
And that's another reason why it's so important that we use this model to come out of fear and really get more engaged in why am I doing what I'm doing, the curious why. I think we need that curiosity. Why am I doing this? Why does it matter? What does it matter to me? What does it matter to the company? Why is it that I'm doing this? What's my purpose? And I think of it as micro purposes.
Yeah.
Like my micro purpose this morning was to get ready for our conversation. So I lined my morning up in a way that said, okay, I'm doing this, this, and this, because this will help me be feeling at my best when I'm ready for our podcast. So that's one. And then the next is self-responsibility. And that is, again, saying that it's up to me to get my needs met. A lot of times we expect for other people, and we're like, well, so-and-so didn't happen, so therefore I can't. So instead we can say, oh, because of this happening, I need to figure out how to get my needs met anyway. Or it may be asking for somebody to help you.
Totally. It's all about this permission slip again.
Yes, it is.
We very often feel like we cannot do things because people didn't say we can.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually the result of course, education system, and then the environment that we have at work again. And I'll never forget a phrase that Patty McCord used during our interview, the ex-Netflix human resources officer. She said, we hire grown-ups and then we treat them like children.
Yes.
And I think that's the main problem with our workplace, one of the key problems actually in our workplace. And then people really start to develop this almost learned helplessness kind of thing, where we just sit there and wait for someone to tell us what to do or meet our needs, as you say.
Yeah. And that's the next step. And that then becomes the next step of self-expression, right? And that is saying this could be, well, this is how this made me feel. I feel disregarded. I feel my idea was just passed by over. I need to understand why. Because if not, we're just going to walk away and feel dismissed. Like we need to speak up. And so it's this idea that it's up to us to communicate so that people know what it is that, number one, we need to move on or create the result that we need to create. But it's also for us to have the responsibility to figure out how to solve that problem.
Yeah. So I have a question around this, and this is triggered by a message that I got today from a friend. We had an exchange online, and she was feeling a little bit frustrated. And she said, I think that the truth is that no one really wants people who challenge the status quo, and especially not women who call for transparency or whatever truth we have to share with our environment. And I think self-expression very often can be a very scary place, because very often the messages that we get, and I think particularly minorities, whether it's women or people of color or some other minorities, it can be very, very scary, because people will shut you down very often in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So do you have any advice to how people can express themselves in a way that is effective?
Yes, because I so agree with you, because I think a lot of times what we see when we think of people speaking up, they speak up by the time they are already angry. Mm-hmm. Or they speak up from a place of fear.
Anger definitely plays a role.
Yeah. They speak up from a place of fear and anger. That's because they didn't speak up when it first happened. Mm-hmm. Right? Because we're not self-aware or have the self-responsibility that says, oops, there was something that didn't work for me. Let me mention that.
Yeah.
Right? Now, it takes a lot to create an environment, what I call a culture of care, where we're giving permission to speak up in this way. But I think if we can actually do that in a way that we respect. So when I talk about a culture of care, I talk about communication, acknowledgement, respect, and empathy. Mm-hmm. So that it actually becomes this way of communicating between leaders and their teams, between teams and themselves. So the self-care piece is our relationship with ourselves. And the culture of care is the relationship between people. Mm-hmm. Right? And so if we can actually start honoring that we come from different perspectives, and that we actually all have the same, so we come from different perspectives, but we all have the same human needs. Yeah. Right? So it's a fine balance there between the inclusion of human beings means that we need to be enough willing to see the diverse in the human being. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It makes total sense.
Yeah, it's like it's another conversation of diversion and inclusion here that goes a little bit deeper into the root of what does that really mean? Right? Because it's not just on the surface, it's actually us having that self-care or that self-management, that self-responsibility that helps us see that we matter, see that we can contribute, but the culture also allows for that because it actually wants it. It wants the different experiences and perspectives, well knowing that it comes because our human needs are satisfied.
Yeah. So a lot of our listeners are people who are responsible for teams, either team leaders or managers or senior executives. And I'm sure that they would like to hear a few tips and ideas of how to create that culture of care. So, if you start from a culture of fear and blame and lack of self-care, where people are at this edge of stress, as you say, how do you turn this around? Where do you start?
I think we need to start on the physical safety, stress, survival mode first. And that is create a work structure that allows for people to take a pause and a break between meetings. So a lot of times work schedules are 1-hour meetings and they're butt up right next to each other instead of having that 45-minute meeting that has been shown to be just as effective as 60 minutes. And then go, well, okay, we have that buffer time in between. That is a policy, there's a strategic change that a company can create. Yeah. That's one simple way. It will take a little time to implement, but it certainly is possible. And also the idea that people have places to connect with each other that is not at the desk, at the work desk, but for example, have lunch with your team. And just have a conversation. If you look at sport teams, when they are trying to bond and connect and trust each other, they'll have a meal. Right? And it's this idea that if we're breaking bread, so to speak, like if we're sitting down and having a meal together, we're nourishing something within us that we recognize and we let our guard down a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's a way for us to just communicate and create this human connection without necessarily having to be about work, but it helps us solve work because it helps us trust each other and care for each other. And the other is to start asking that question. I notice this is not working. What do you need so that you can? That is the first level of, or the sort of like the magic little bullet to start creating a company culture of care, is that number one, we take care of the physical parameters, but we also take care of this sense of like, actually you matter and I'm asking you more questions so that you can contribute.
Yeah, totally. I think that we all need a healthy balance of challenge and support.
Exactly.
And our modern workplace basically throws a lot of challenge at people, but we forget about providing that support.
Yeah.
I think this question is such a very, very simple and yet powerful way of providing that support.
Yeah.
Or at least saying, I'm here if you need some support.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we teach people that they're having the tools to self-manage.
That's right.
And then that starts changing the entire culture. Because culture is really about trust. Trust and connection, and the fact that we care about each other, that we actually say to somebody, hey, I noticed that you're struggling with that. Can I help? Like just this idea that we care about each other because we also care about ourselves, of course.
Totally. And also culture is about expectations. And I think a way of cultivating expectations, like, for example, my expectation is that you will have that lunch break instead of sitting at your desk. And I think particularly as a leader, you have this power of cultivating that and shaping that, because if you see your team members sitting at their desks and eating chips instead of a proper lunch, then you can say, hey, why don't you go down and let's grab a lunch together.
Yes.
And if you do this frequently enough, I think you start cultivating that expectation that actually is expected of us to have a proper lunch rather than just sitting at our desks and grabbing a snack.
Yeah. And it starts with a leader taking lunch. And it's a funny thing, right? Because you have this idea that the leaders are always like, oh, I'm going out for lunch kind of thing. But I also have leaders that tell me that they're not eating lunch because they don't feel they have the time. And they're assuming that their team doesn't care. And it's like, well, that's probably not true. So, because that means your team doesn't feel that they can do it either.
Yes.
And I've seen it. I've seen leaders come back to me and say, not only do I feel better, but you can't believe this. My team started eating lunch after I did, and teamwork actually improved. And when that's the discovery after just 2 weeks of the leader taking lunch, not even sitting down with their team to have lunch, just themselves taking care of themselves, it affected the entire team.
And it's, it's so funny because it's really just going back to the basics, right? And it's almost funny that we have to talk about this as if this was something that people didn't know about. But honestly, we've forgotten, right?
Yes.
We've forgotten how important these things are. It's incredible.
Yeah. And I think especially in our technology-driven world, we keep looking for answers and we keep looking for something to solve our problems, when it really comes back to we can solve our problem, not necessarily all the problems, of course, in terms of what we face at work, but this idea that we still come first.
Yes.
It's still very like, if I ask people sometimes when I do my speaking engagements, I'll say to people, so how did you get to work today? Right? And everybody's like, I took the train, I took a car, I took a taxi, I did, da, da, da. And I'm like, did anybody consider that your body took you to work today?
Oh, yeah. I love it.
Right? We forget.
We forget.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
So true.
So I just hope that we can...
vehicle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I just hope we can honor ourselves and our bodies a little bit more, because if we can do that, then we can start actually using all these amazing emotional and mental skills that we're learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have such bad relationships with our bodies nowadays.
Yes.
Most people, I think. So that's another interview, I think, and another conversation that we would have
we'll have to dig
about
into that. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So basic stuff, basically, but not so easy to do in terms of first taking care of those basic human needs like nutrition and water. And then what would be the next step, Jeanette, in terms of cultivating that culture of care? You said ask, is there anything that, what needs to happen? What can I do to help you? Is there anything else that people can start doing?
And then start listening more. Right. So we want to contribute. So we need to belong. We need to feel safe. We need to feel that we belong, that we matter. And then we need to feel that that our contribution is worth it. Like the woman I was talking about, that all of a sudden I actually used her knowledge to affect the department. And so this idea that people see that their contribution is actually being heard. It may not work, but at least it's being heard. I think we're misunderstanding that if people contribute, we should use their idea. But it could lead to something else.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
And so if we can have more curiosity, then I think we can find more solutions. And if we can give people the responsibility to find these solutions, then we allow everybody to grow, which is really what it's about.
Yeah. Freedom and responsibility. Yeah. Love that. Yeah. Okay, so let's move to the rapid fire questions.
Sure.
And this is a series of 5 questions. I'll ask them really quickly. We have only 2 minutes, to answer these questions. There are 5 of them. And the first one is, how do you define organizational culture?
I define it as a place where people feel they belong, they feel safe, and they care about each other.
And what are the signs that a company culture needs some work or perhaps even a major overhaul?
That people are working under fear and self-doubt, but also that they're burning out from not really taking care of themselves at all, just the basic physical needs. Yeah.
Are there any companies that you admire for their culture?
There are people like Asana, Marriott, Southwest, Eileen Fisher as well, because there's a culture there that's founded in caring about people.
Are there any books on culture or on leadership or perhaps on self-care that you would recommend our listeners read?
Yeah, I like The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. I like The Mind of a Leader for my fellow Dane, Rasmus Haugaard. But also some newer books that have come out, like The Good Fight by Leanne Davey. She talks about conflict at work, and I think it's important that we start understanding how conflict can be a way to resolution. Yeah. I also love Cy Wakeman and her reality-based leadership, because it's all about ditching the drama and letting go of the ego. And I think it's so important in a culture scenario. But even company culture for dummies. A friend of mine wrote the book. His name is Mike Ganino, and he's great. He's a storyteller, and his way of looking at culture and how it engages people in terms of what stories are, what is the story that the company is telling that the employees can buy into or retell. It's a brilliant little funny book. So
I haven't read it, to be honest, but I love the For Dummies series. Yeah. So I didn't know that company culture for dummies exists. Yeah. I'm definitely going to reach out and check it out. Yeah. Awesome recommendations. And in terms of first, before I go there, one last question. What is one thing, we already talked about a number of things that people can do, but what is the one thing that our listeners could do literally tomorrow to build their own culture lab and start cultivating a sort of culture that will help them and their teams to bring their vision to life?
Ask that question. What can I do to X, Y, and Z? Like, what do I need right now so that I can? Or even ask each other, how are you? What do you need so that you can? So I think it's both asking ourselves and it's asking each other. Well, knowing that we're not responsible for other people's actions in that way, but we are responsible for helping them see what the answer might be.
Beautiful. And who do you think would be a great guest on the Culture Lab podcast. Do you have any recommendations for me?
I think you should get Mike Ganino on and talk about the culture for dummies, so to speak.
Okay,
He's
yeah,
great.
I'd
He's
love
fun.
to. Can you connect me?
Yes, I can.
You said that you know him, right?
I certainly can.
Oh, that will be fantastic. Thank you.
I totally can.
I'm really looking forward to speaking to him.
Another one I really like is Chris Westphal. He has one that's called Leadership Language, a book that's called Leadership Language, which is again about how do we actually engage with each other through how we communicate. Yeah.
Wonderful. So this is a second great recommendation. Thank you so much, Jeanette. And thank you so much for being with us. I think that our listeners got a lot of really practical tips. First of all, on how to take care of themselves. And I think that it's really important because at the end of the day, it really starts with us and how we show up. And it has an impact. We do create ripples around us. I sometimes say that we are responsible for the culture in the radius of 2 meters from us, basically.
Yes.
So I think if we are not in the right shape and in the right mind, then it's, the culture that we create is not a healthy culture. Yeah. So it's really important, this self-care piece.
It is.
And also thank you for sharing all this really interesting and powerful stuff about culture of care.
Yes, thank you.
So if our listeners want to learn more about culture of care and self-care, where should they go?
They can find me on social media anywhere under Jeanette Bronée. My website is also JeanetteBronée.com, but I also have a blog that's pathforlife.com. And so I post articles and different tools and things there. So that's another way to find me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Aga Bayer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast. And this is the Culture Lab team.
Production manager, Lindsay Nunez.
Art director, Emily Spencer.
Aaron Scott, content editor.
Sound producer, James Eade, Be Heard.
If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab podcast yet, you can do it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and many other places where podcasts are available. If you'd like to subscribe to my newsletter, The Culture Lab Insider, go to www.agabayer.com/podcast and scroll down to the very bottom of the page. That's www.agabayer.com/podcast. Also, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review the podcast on iTunes. And now, before we say goodbye, I want to give you a preview of my next interview with Ed Morrison. Ed directs the Agile Strategy Lab at Purdue University. And in this interview, we talk about what's the solution to strategic planning when the speed of change and the complexity of problems are such that it seems virtually impossible and perhaps even pointless to make elaborate plans for the long term. We talk about an approach to developing strategies for complex collaboration in open, loosely connected networks. Ed's methodology is called Strategic Doing, and he's just published a book under the same title. And a tiny side note, if you love Yo-Yo Ma, like I do, you'll be delighted to find out that he's written the foreword to Ed's book. And in this foreword, he says that he's been waiting for this book for his whole life. Have a listen.
An effective strategy is a process of shared learning. We are dealing with complex challenges across our organizations, across our communities. There are no definitive single point solutions that we can come up with. These are not technical problems. These are complex challenges. So effective strategy is a process, an ongoing process that has open participation across the organization and leadership guidance. It combines both of those. The leadership guidance comes from framing the conversation, creating the safe spaces, and then guiding the conversation around 4 critical questions to answer where are we going and how will we get there.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Culture Lab. If you found any moments that were interesting, inspiring, or maybe even game-changing, please share it with someone who'd appreciate it. After all, Good ideas are meant to be shared.